and I am handing this microphone over to Jesse Bean of Charter Choices.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Good morning. Happy Friday. I see lots of familiar faces and names on the screen here. Lots of friends from across Pennsylvania. Looks like we've got a lot of Western PA represented today, some Central PA, a little bit of Poconos and Lehigh Valley, and of course, Philly's in the house. So great to see everybody. As Cheryl mentioned, Charter Choices has been a longtime supporter of the coalition and has been involved in the Pennsylvania Charter School Program grant since its inception. So proud to support this grant, both on the accounting side and with technical assistance. As you may remember or recall, Charter Choices became part of the Vertex family of organizations about this time a year ago. And so we are proud today to introduce a couple of our friends from our Vertex family. Jason Fernandez, the Chief People Officer of Vertex, is with us today. Hi, Jason. Welcome to PA virtually. And Lindsay Nelson, Vice President of Human Resources with Vertex, is also with us. And Lindsay's going to present today. We've been running a series since the spring on different subjects that are pertinent to school leaders and boards in Pennsylvania. And today's focus is school operations, which is a very broad category. And we chose today to focus on one particular aspect of school operations, and that's human resources. The challenge, which I don't need to tell you about as school leaders because you're all too familiar with it, is attracting great talent, keeping great talent, making sure that they're engaged and happy and productive. It's a competitive marketplace. Teachers are hard to come by. And so we're enlisting Lindsay's expertise today to share with us some best practices on how to keep and motivate and cultivate a happy workforce. So we're super thrilled to have you, Lindsay, and look forward to hearing from you. And thank you all for being with us today. Lindsay, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Jesse. And what a setup. You know, the expectations are high now at this point. So thanks for leading me in there. So as Jesse said, my name is Lindsay Kohler. I just recently changed my name, so please forgive us for going back and forth between the two. Can everybody hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up. Okay, awesome. So we're here to talk about boosting teacher satisfaction, something that is not going to be the quick catch-all. We're not going to give you the get-rich-quick scheme here today. It's going to take work. So, I don't want to set up your expectations of, Jesse sold you on, Lindsay knows all the secrets and tools to keep teachers happy. I really, really try, but this is an exercise that you and your team can do at your campuses and your locations at a different scale to help research and understand what will help keep your teachers happy. That's a lot to say. It's not going to be, like I said, a get-rich-quick scheme, but it is going to take some work and time and motion studies to understand what your teachers are going through and what obstacles they're engaging with on a regular basis. So we're going to get right into it. Jesse introduced Jason and myself. We're the Vertex Education. I'm the VP of HR Operations. Jason, our Chief People Officer. Vertex, a little bit about us. We're founded in 2007. We grow and support schools by providing academic, business, and development services, such as HR. We currently serve 108,000 students and 100 plus schools throughout the nation. I will hand it over to Jason briefly to talk about our thematic goal and why this project even started.
Thank you, Lindsay. So good morning, everyone. One of the things that we looked at was we had a client called Legacy Traditional Schools who engaged us, and they said they had a problem. It wasn't really a problem. They just said they really wanted to focus on it and teacher morale. So what we did is we helped them create a thematic goal. And really what a thematic goal is a rally cry. It's something of a short-term focus, usually a project that's going to be 3 to 12 months, to say, how do we ensure that everyone's aligned and focusing on the same thing? So they created a thematic goal. They called it Back to Basics. And is really focusing on how do they do a fresh focus on their academic success. And at the bottom, you'll notice that we came up with basically 4 defining objectives, 4 areas that we really wanted to focus on. It was enhance principal support, boost teacher satisfaction, strengthen academic performance, and optimize classroom support. So this was a focused effort by the entire school to really focus on boost teacher satisfaction. So that is kind of the platform for where this began, was looking at how do we do that and get back to the basics. And so from there, we go right into our boosting teacher satisfaction. So when we look at boosting teacher satisfaction, we're really looking at what was the problem, what was the key problem, and we looked at there was a decrease in employee net promoter score. As you all know, net promoter score is how likely is an employee to refer another individual to work at the same employer. So when we looked at that, we saw that. In addition to, we saw an increase in turnover and a staffing shortage. So we look at that. We know we have a teacher shortage. We have a decrease in net promoter score. We're like, the school was like, oh my gosh, what do we do? Well, obviously there was a lot of assumptions. There was things like, okay, during COVID, elements of distrust had grown, lack of transparency and communication, even with increased compensation, it continued to be an area of frustration. There was no consistent teacher onboarding process and increased workload. So in that, it was areas of focus. And these were all the assumptions. Keep in mind, right now it's still kind of like, okay, what do we think is the problem? Areas of focus, we're focusing on communication, transparency, onboarding, resource training, culture and community. And then we looked at a bunch of discovery data points, which is the survey feedbacks, time and motion studies, campus onboarding procedures, Zendesk tickets, and back to basics targeted survey. So we'll talk about all of those. That's a lot of information, but really at the surface level, it was just diagnosing the problem and what was next. All right, Lindsay.
Yeah, so I don't know that we need to recreate the wheel here, but really it's important to understand why we're looking at all of those pieces that Jason just mentioned as we get into the project. And so certainly you can assume your teachers aren't happy because they want to get paid more. Sure, that, we all could assume that at this rate based on, teacher funding and whatnot. But we really wanted to narrow down and be able to make data-driven decisions to better support the messaging behind the why. That was a really big piece of feedback that we got in a lot of the surveys is, I don't understand why changes happen. And so, to help boost satisfaction, helping them understand the why, but providing metrics behind it was something that was really important to us, especially when we talk about a project that directly impacts them and their satisfaction. They want to know the why. They may not agree with some of the outcomes because they may not know what their other coworkers or other cohorts want or need. So certainly just helping understand where we're coming from and how we came to those decisions. It's never meant to be a negative outcome, but here are the reasons why, and here are the metrics and things that we looked at to improve employee retention. Here are the things that we looked at to help improve employee satisfaction. Here are the metrics that we measured to improve academic performance. Because at the end of the day, if those things don't come out of this project, then why are we doing this? So really wanted to look at that and emphasize the importance of doing the discovery, really looking at the roles and responsibilities of our campuses to start this project. And when we get to the meat and potatoes of this project, it's looking at the time and motion studies that we conducted at the campus level. So the discovery of projects, we really looked at we had a lot of emphasis on survey feedback because that is information that we routinely had. So our best places to work survey, we also had admin surveys that we looked at, exit surveys. This is information that was already collected that we just looked at and aggregated to help us drive the project. Excuse me. We looked at the key root cause analysis of key causes and whys of this information was evaluated and what are some of the outcomes that came out of the surveys. Now, we could have just used the surveys to drive the project, but for us, that wasn't enough. We wanted to gather additional discovery data because, we thought it was important to look at the time and motion studies of teachers to better understand why they gave us these responses in the surveys. Because, having the survey responses is one thing, but understanding like where they're coming from and the reasons behind why they're feeling certain ways. We needed to better understand because none of us were in the classroom with the teachers at the end of the day. We do classroom observations, we look at, performance and we look at instruction, we look at academic ratings, but has anybody ever lived the life of a teacher? Yes, if you have a background in teaching, you've probably been there, done that, right? But for a lot of us, we have not lived the life of a teacher. So really understanding what the day in the life looks like for them. Excuse me. So some additional things that we looked at. I mentioned the admin surveys, best places to work surveys, employee exit surveys. We looked at that survey analysis and found common words between the different surveys. So we really focused in and honed in on a lot of the feedback that was provided in the survey. A lot of them were open-ended answers, so it's hard to aggregate sentences, right, to come up with data. So we looked at those common words: compensation, benefits, those are kind of the given, but looked at prep time, or looked at classroom management concerns, behavior, looked at other things, not just when it comes down at the end of the day, compensation and benefits. We really looked at a lot of the focus problems and tried to identify where we wanted to capture some of our tracking for the time and motion study, because it couldn't just be an open-ended survey of, you know, writing notes vigorously. We needed to aggregate information based on some of the findings that we had. So looking at that, we didn't want to silo the participants of this survey. We wanted to look at people who are outside of the education realm. So we'll talk a little bit about how we selected and who we selected to be part of the time and motion studies.
And I think it's important to add there, not every school is going to have all of this data. We understand that, right? Like this school that we were helping, they had some of these surveys already built out, but where they didn't have stuff, we helped build out the survey. So it's not a matter of if you're looking at this and you're saying like, I can't relate because I don't have all this data, it's okay. There's a way to be able to compile this information so all of this can make sense to you as well, and be able to aggregate the data and be able to take actionable items. So just keep that in mind. Don't be like, oh, we don't have all this data. That's totally okay. There are ways that you can gather this data through various surveys, or even just compiling it. So I just want to add that. Go ahead, Lindsay.
No, that's a great point. And we were just privileged, I think, at that point to have so many different sources of information to have a starting point. But even with that survey information, we still wanted to go above and beyond and conduct a time and motion study. So you can do surveys till you're blue in the face, but really, we think the time and motion study is really what changed and impacted this project the most. So talking about that, I don't know if any of you have participated in a time and motion study. I had never done one prior to this project. One of our behavioral analysts at Vertex was the one who recommended this exercise. And I think that's something that, from her scientific mindset, was really beneficial to contribute to the project. Looking at the teacher activity, and I mentioned before, we do classroom observations and we provide feedback on instruction and classroom management. But a time and motion study is really looking at the specific job and what is required by the person to complete the task. So looking at that, but then also tracking the amount of time it's taking them to complete the task. And this was not meant to measure, well, this teacher's really slow, or this isn't happening quick enough. It's looking at the day in the life of a teacher and saying, wow, they're spending this amount of time doing this task. What can we do to help innovate and create more improvement in their process? And we'll talk a little bit about what that observation looked like and give some examples. Jason himself was a test candidate for conducting the time and motion study, so he has some interesting stories that he brought back to us that he got to see in the classroom. But it's really measuring the time it's taking them to complete these things, and then obviously putting our brains together and how we can improve some of the time that they're spending in other areas so they can focus on more important things like instruction and preparing for instruction. Pardon me. So what is needed when we talk about a time and motion study? Setting you up for success is really what we want to do and what we want to help you with. And while I want to give examples of how we did it, this does not mean it's a cookie cutter process for you and your campuses to be able to facilitate the same exercise. You need to downsize it, rescale it, whatever that works for you. We started with one intention in our mind, and we had to scale down based on just availability of teachers and availability of people to conduct the time and motion study. So just because we did it this way does not mean this is going to work for your campuses. You need to just, make some minor adjustments. But how we pictured it is that we had participants who did not have an academic background. So, Jason, Chief People Officer, has never been an instructor in a classroom, but he was a participant in the time and motion study. We also had folks from accounting, finance, trying to think of who else. I mean, just every team within our academic realm, our functional departments. So not a lot of folks who were from the academic realm. Looking at talent acquisition, so we had a couple of recruiters who participated in the time and motion study. I think having not been in the classroom really helps isolate some of the time and motion tracking, so you're not focused so much on the content of instruction, but looking at really the time tracking. We spent the entire day in the class, so from start to finish, we tracked their time in motion. So it was about 8 hours in the day, just depending on when instruction started for that day. The point was not to provide solutions during that exercise. It was strictly note-taking and a lot of note-taking. So don't plan to like do side work while you're in the classroom. There was no time for that. Jason tried to cheat and work while he was in the class, and he quickly learned there was not enough time to do both. You really need to be curious and gather evidence as you go through the time and motion study, write down questions if you don't understand what something is, but everything is on the table, right? You want to track everything that they're doing. And so don't think this isn't relative to the study if they're helping a student pack their lunch or, pick up their backpack. That is part of the time and motion study, is understanding how long it's taking them to help support students in that way. And look at all functional areas. So while we want them to go have lunch on their own, look at when they're going into their HRIS system and maybe pulling up their pay stub, clocking in time, clocking out time, sending an email, communicating with parents. All of that we really wanted to look at and document the time and effort that it's taking them to complete. The benefits of the time and motion study, maybe I'm, self promoting at this point in time, but I really think this was the best project and the best way to approach this activity. But it's understanding the reality of what the teachers are going through. And now the time and motion study was just one day in the classroom. So if we really had the time and energy to be able to be in the classroom for a week, I think that would have been really eye-opening as well. But just being there for a day was so beneficial for us to understand what their struggles are and what they're spending their time on. And we'll go over some of the results of that exercise as well. But really understanding some of the credibility opportunities too. I think we gained respect from our teachers for being in the classroom as well and understanding the day in the life, because I think that goes back to what I mentioned before, is understanding the why. When we go back to talk to teachers and helping explain change, we're more credible about how we explain it because we understand how this may impact them better. But also them seeing us wanting to be in the classroom with them and engage with them and be with their students, that really went a long way, I think, as a result of the exercise as well.
So we used 3 different methods to gather the data. The first one was shadowing, and this is the most extensive. This is really where it involved following an individual around, recording all other tasks and how long. So this is a dedicated individual, almost a one-on-one, to where we shadowed their motions. The second method we used was active sampling, and this is where we entered a work area at random in times and gathered what was happening. So for an example of this would be going into the lunchroom during lunchtime and observing what was taking place, who was involved, what did those activities look like? How did a transition between classes? That's an active sampling. And then the last one we used was self-recording, and this is where we asked some of the school personnel to actually record what their duties are. And when we say that, is more kind of a recap. So you can see the differences in the level. Shadowing is going to be the most extensive, where we would gather the most detailed data. Active sampling is going to be a little bit broader. And then the self-recording, which is just an employee kind of jotting down what they're doing. So there's going to be significant gaps. They're just capturing more of the larger functions that are being done. So those were the 3 methods we used. So you're silent, Lindsay.
Sorry about that. I clicked the slide, not my mic first, but so steps to execute. The first thing we did were identify the teams. We had a deeper discussion with the team on what the intention of the time and motion study is and what the next steps were going to be. We took that aggregated data and from the surveys, those keywords, and we identified the tasks that we wanted to measure. So like student management, classroom management, conflict management. Looked at different categories where we wanted to track the information in the time and motion study. And then we communicated to the staff that here's what's going to take place. And not just the staff that we did time and motion studies for, but everyone. And I think it was really important that they understood why we were there. Again, going back to the why. But this isn't meant to be a gotcha. This isn't meant to be, we're babysitting in their classroom. Really understanding the intention of why we're in your classroom and note taking everything that you're doing, right? That could be a little, put teachers on the defensive of like, okay, why is this person stalking me? Because we literally were stalking them for the day. But really helping them understand why we were going to be there. And then before setting up that classroom observation, the participant communicated directly with the teacher. So said, hey, I'm coming into your classroom on this day. Does that work for you? If we need to change it, we can. I'll be there at this time. What time do you usually get there? Just kind of coordinating with them and helping them understand when you were going to be there and why. And then also setting the stage of, yes, I may follow you to the break room, or I may follow you out of the classroom, and like helping them understand we're not, being weird. We're just really doing a time and motion study for them. Things to remember before executing is that we wanted to make sure that we were getting valuable information in order to analyze it correctly. And when we say like, yes, we did follow them to the break room or, into the lunchroom, there were reasons behind that when we first thought about this. Now, I think I'll give away one of the results of this activity. None of the teachers went to go sit in the break room and have a free lunch. They were always doing something else. So I think that's just true to what we were trying to capture, right? It's very rare that a teacher will get to go sit and have a break for 30 minutes uninterrupted. So we captured that, that was a result of that. And I think as a reflection step, observers, it may not or may have been better to have them insider knowledge, but I think it's still beneficial. And as we went into it, introducing the observer to the teacher and understanding, Chief People Officer Jason, I'm not a teacher. I don't expect to come into your classroom and tell you that you're doing your job wrong. I'm setting the stage of I'm here to do the time and motion study, and I'm here to analyze that time and motion. So really just explaining the background of the observer to the teacher as well before going into the classroom. So this is an example, and I just wanted to show you because it you may be trying to wrap your brain around like, how did we track information? This is an example of an observation sheet, and this was built out again by our behavioral analyst. And it was really actually user-friendly when you got into it, and Jason can speak to that a little bit more. But looking at how much information we tracked and the time and motion of each activity, we probably ran out of room at a certain point, just depending on how long you were there in the classroom. But this just gives you an idea of what like our observation template looks like. It was in Excel. It wasn't anything that, we bought off of a platform. It's something that you could build, or we could help you build it if needed. So just wanted to share that with you as an example of what it looks like.
All right, so there's a whole lot of data on here. So this is my actual observation form that I completed from the day that I spent in the classroom. And really for me, as Lindsay shared, I've been an HR practitioner for 25 years, so I know education very well, but until I had the opportunity to literally sit in the classroom and follow the teacher throughout the entire day, it was truly an eye-opening experience. And I mean, what we use is we use this spreadsheet, and we're capturing the data and the activities that are happening. And we put them into categories. That's the gray pop out there. You'll see that we put them into 7 different categories. So we had the spreadsheet already set up by those categories, so it's pretty easy to do click downs and drop downs. And you'll notice like the very first one at 8:10, 8:16, I was able to capture an activity of classroom management, and the kiddos are getting ready to get homework put away, attendance and review. So then by the time I'm capturing how much time they spent on each of these things, all the way down to, like you see at 8:58, there was a student disruption or student interruption, when that was like when a student, interrupted the class. All the way down to, I've recorded, you can see down at 11:37, there was a student interruption. I would like to call this one out because you can see it was 11:37 to 11:38 disruption, where the student coughed and literally was like, can I spit this out? Created laughter for the class, which, it disrupted the class. So it's important to capture all of these things. And then from there, we aggregated the data into that pop out, which is to say, okay, throughout this day, where is all of the time being spent? Classroom management, there was a couple of student interruptions. You can see 4.65% of the day was student interruptions, 13% of behavior management. So this gave us the ability to dive deeper into like, okay, what is truly happening in the classroom? So once we went through the entire day of me following the teacher around and documenting everything, we led into an interview. So I was able to sit down with the teacher and be able to ask really these questions. And part of this is, we're not talking about the day and diving into like kind of the summary of the information. It was then I wanted to hear from her, what are these regular tasks or activities you're expected to complete that you believe take longer than they should, or overcomplicated, or inefficiencies? So then we were getting the perspective from the teacher on these categories. So we're getting, what are those regular tasks or activities you're expected to complete that don't seem to have clear value? So capturing it from their perspective, because they have all of their items that they need to complete. And some of them they found were busy work. I need to rotate this bulletin board too frequently, or I need to do certain things. We're able to capture those and then be able to compile the data. And the last one is, what tasks or activities do you believe can or should be completed by someone else? The intent here, and they were prepped before. I had a conversation with the teacher prior to even going into the classroom saying, here's our intent. So it's not a matter of can they just get things off of their plate. They came into it also trying to figure out like solutions, right? So they're able to share like, hey, I don't know if this makes the most sense for me to be doing. What if we had someone else doing it? So it was a really good interview, and the interview itself was probably about 45 minutes to an hour of just hearing their perspective. So now we have all of the data and the analytics. We have the observation that I've copied, and now we also have the interviews. So now we have a lot more data in conjunction with all the surveys that we also have, right? So that then segues right into kind of our next piece, which is looking at the current state.
And I think it's fair to just share how many time and motion studies we actually ended up doing. I think we projected to do about 40 with teachers calling out and schedule conflicts. We only ended up doing about 30 time and motion studies. And when I say only, that's a pretty significant amount, I think, for the amount of information we received out of the time and motion study. If we could have done 100, I think that would have been interesting as well. But that volume was still enough for us to aggregate the information from those interviews that, Jason mentioned that took about 45 minutes, plus our survey feedback. There was value in only doing a demographic size of that nature.
I want to add one thing. Just keep in mind. So that may sound overwhelming. That's a lot of time and motion studies. Keep in mind, this was for a school district of 19 schools. So it wasn't just a school. So that's why there was such a high volume of observations. Obviously, if you're looking at your school and you're looking at one or two, or you have one or two campuses, the volume of observations can be a much smaller sampling size. This was just a very large school group school district that we were working with.
Yeah, and to Jason's point, that was actually only about 1 to 2 observations per school. So it wasn't, when I say that number, it's because we had multiple schools that we were doing that at. And then for the demographic groups that we picked for the time and motion studies, I picked anywhere from a brand new teacher to a veteran teacher as well. I made sure that the population were varied quite a bit because, one, as the data showed, as an end result, some of the veteran teachers were better at classroom management. And so that didn't take as much time during their day, whereas the new teachers were a little more green in the classroom management time. And so we got to, come with a collective average. I don't think it would be fair that you only observe veteran teachers because, a lot of the green teachers are the ones that may turn over a little bit faster too. So we want to make their lives equally as beneficial as an outcome of the project. So making sure you have a variety of different teachers that you are wanting to observe as well. So some of the outcomes of the project and some of the, I just want to set the stage, right, of where we were at and then what the outcomes were based on where we were at, if that makes sense. I don't know. So current state, our teachers had early release on Wednesdays. And what we learned from the time and motion study and some of the survey feedback was that Wednesday day turned into everything day. You know, a lot of opportunities came out of looking at that afternoon that they had off. And so people would usually pile it with training, meetings, conferences, you know, opportunities to take that time on that Wednesday afternoon from them to utilize for other business matters. But feedback that we got out of the exercise was, wow, that, you know, Wednesday tends to be a crazy day for me now, even though it's early release, because everything just gets piled onto that day. Some of the current state that we learned from that interview feedback as well is that teachers were watching students from 7:30 to 8 a.m. so they couldn't have time to set up their classroom. And so helping with driveline or helping shuffle students to the right classroom, they were spending that first half hour in the morning instead of getting ready to instruct. They were usually monitoring or transferring students from one classroom to the next. Another outcome was that understanding that tutoring was not as beneficial to students as we had hoped, or maybe more stressful for the teachers in being able to prepare for tutoring, because tutoring was usually provided to students who are at different learning levels or different academic achievement levels than their peers. And so preparing for tutoring was a challenge for teachers because they had to address the learning level of each student uniquely. And so spending time finding curriculum or finding materials for those students took a lot of time out of their prep time to be able to deliver you know, an appropriate tutoring level for each of those students. And so that was feedback that we learned from the exercise as well. That, you know, this is taking a lot of time, is finding the appropriate curriculum for tutoring while I'm trying to do, you know, XYZ, preparing for my regular instruction. And then we have our classes, our special classes that we call them specials, but all, I don't know, electives are usually what they're called. So language, computers, PE. A lot of times when teachers would call out sick, they would cancel the specials class, and then to eliminate the need for hiring a substitute teacher for a special class, they would blend some of those students into the general ed classes to help just provide coverage, especially during COVID. So the specials were canceled, and so impacting the general ed teachers quite a bit for having to pick up coverage if a special class was canceled, because we couldn't get sub coverage. So that was a pain point for the teachers as well, as losing prep time because they're helping cover some of the canceled classes because we could not find subs to appropriately staff for the day. So coming out of this exercise, you know, our question was, is it realistic that we could change all of these things for the teachers? And to a certain extent, I think we did a really good job. But at the end of the day, people call out sick. And so if we can't find a sub that day, I don't think there's a magic wand that we can wave to get a sub into a classroom. We do have to realistically, you know, maybe merge a class every now and then when a substitute teacher is not available. So some of the solutions we came up with are awareness factors and things that we can put in place to help, you know, handle those situations as they arise, but that doesn't mean that'll never happen again. So we didn't want to make promises to teachers that we couldn't keep, because that's just not fair either. And I think one of the things Jason mentioned in his observation was like rotating the bulletin board. You know, that was mentioned as one of the problems, is teachers having to spend time on that instead of focusing on instruction. You know, those are things that I think they identified as a waste of time. And so looking at opportunities outside of this exercise, maybe find, you know, maybe an administrative assistant or a TA could update the bulletin board. That's not going to be captured in our outcome, but that's just something that that was kind of a low-hanging fruit for us, maybe not the meat and potatoes of the exercise that we wanted to address. So getting into some of those more high-level solutions, one of the ideas that we really wanted to look at was finding time for the teachers to prepare for the day or having time to take a break. Jason, I don't recall specifically, but I don't think your teacher took a lunch, I think, or went to the bathroom at all.
Yeah, so she actually ate while I was doing the interview, and when I say ate, she like took 2 bites of a sandwich, I think. So it was like one of those, like I was perplexed that it was the no restroom break, and literally was eating on the run, and even that was not a full meal. So for sure.
Right. So that was one of the big goals that came out of this project, is how they're spending their time is just it's hard to say one thing is going to solve all of the world's problems, but we looked at these ideas and solutions of some of the things that we did thought took up a lot of their time that took away from their instruction time, right? So helping with that morning duty, that first half hour in the day when they're shuffling students, not preparing for the classroom, that bulletin board comment, looking at the lesson plan opportunity for tutoring, that was a big time absorber for the teachers, is trying to find that specialized curriculum for their students. Grading, that's something that we can't take away, but how do we give them more time to be able to do the grading, not necessarily take away grading? Intervention, that tutoring assistance, and then that afternoon on Wednesdays, that got piled up with meetings and, lesson planning and training. What can we do with those days? So really looking at some of those ideas and solutions of what we can do there. So what you've all been waiting for is what came out of this whole activity. So I'm really excited to share some of our outcomes. And I think something to keep in mind, and I was thinking about this morning, is that we did this time and motion study last year. And as you turn over teachers and you have them, move up and promote into different roles, they may not realize that these are benefits to them that came out of this exercise, because now this is the new normal. And so even though we did this time and motion study a year ago, we really have to continue this exercise and continue evaluating the classroom to look for more opportunities to help improve the teacher time and motion studies, because I think we could get into falling back into old habits. One, like that Wednesday half day, people may forget that this is a teacher focused time and may start piling things back onto that Wednesday. So being aware that that's happening, but also just looking for new opportunities for teachers, because we know the evolution of the classroom is changing year after year. So making sure that you're still going back into that classroom and finding those optimization opportunities for teachers is going to be really important. So I'll get off that wheel horse, but just wanted to talk about some of the outcomes that we came up with as part of the exercise. So teacher focus time is that we took that Wednesday half day and we made sure that there is a block of time for every teacher that is untouchable. And when I say untouchable, your administrator can't put time on your calendar, your, Vertex can't provide a training at that time. This is the teacher focus time on the Wednesday where you need to be working on your classroom and what's going to benefit you at the end of the day. So we made sure for the longevity of that teacher focus time, we do an annual administrative survey. There's a question in there to make sure that this is being used effectively. And we've actually already gotten feedback this year of, what happened to teacher focus time. And so, like I said, people can fall back into old habits. So making sure that teachers are aware, this is your focus time. If it's being interrupted, giving their administrator the feedback, talking to their deputy superintendent about why this is being impeded. So we're trying to continue to get feedback if that teacher focus time is being disrupted. So really focusing on trying to continue that routine for our teachers. We also currently use Schoology for our student information platform. And so we created a teacher collaboration chat groups within Schoology, to where we created groups of grade level teachers and cohorts where they could collaborate and share curriculum or resources for other teachers in that same grade level. So being able to collaborate across different campuses with each other to share information and resources that they had. So like a little community, chat board per se. Within Schoology, we created that. And you could do that with different maybe within your school or maybe within different subjects. Maybe you merge PE and something else. You could be creative with it. And obviously it's a platform that we already owned. We just built out the ability to share or have that community platform. There are other platforms you could use for that as well. We wanted to be able to utilize the system that was already in place. So we looked at Schoology for that, but obviously creating a community network or community board for your teachers. I think that was really beneficial and gave them the opportunity to talk to each other, because those veteran teachers that nail classroom management every day, it would be really great if they could take that younger teacher under their wing and provide some of those resources, tips, and tricks to each other. We also looked at that tutoring hurdle that they ran into. So we implemented IXL, which is a subscription for personalized learning and curriculum for our teachers. This was actually a platform that was recommended as part of the feedback from the interviews. One of our teachers had mentioned they had used IXL at a different school district. And so we looked at that as a resource and thought it was great. And so now our K-6 teachers have those resources a little more readily available. They're not doing research on their own where they could pull up a grade level or learning level to look at curriculum for their students. And so helping them shortcut that time they're using to spend researching and finding the right learning level for their students, this really helped jumpstart and save them time at the end of the day. And then as HR professionals, we wanted to look at some bells and whistles that we could provide to our teachers just to help incentivize them in their day. Obviously, we didn't capture a huge pay increase as part of as a result of this project, because we know that's not going to happen. You know, and I say that facetiously, right? We would love to give them a pay increase if we could, but at the end of the day, to create more sustainability for our teachers, we looked at more wellness programs. So we implemented Dave Ramsey's Smart Dollar program, which is a budgeting tool. Not sure if you're familiar with that. And then we worked with EOS, which is a gym here in Arizona that they have a membership program that we were able to provide gym reimbursement for their utilization. And so I think the membership is $10 a month, and we track if an employee goes to the gym 10 times a month, we reimburse them that $10 a month for going to the gym to help incentivize their mental health and wellness. So something that's come out of it. And I think we have a great participation as part of that. Just looking at more opportunities for a holistic wellness program for our teachers. So we looked at obviously the academic side, the prepping and planning side, the collaboration, and then also their mental health and wellness, because that's really important for us and the longevity of our teachers as well. So long story short, we shared a lot of information with you, a lot of data, a lot of, you know, maybe overwhelming for where we came from at the project level. But I don't think this is necessarily something that isn't obtainable for you and your campuses. This is something that, you know, we had a robust plan around it. We had a huge team planning around it, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can't be doing this tomorrow with your team. You know, certainly I think the communication and project planning is really important. So setting your teachers up for success and that relationship building as you approach this concept is really important. And the transparency behind it. We want to share the why, right? We go back to, we want to improve your lives and we want to look for areas of opportunity to help improve your systems and processes. So helping explain that at the end of the day, I think is really important, but this is something that you could be doing for your campuses. And I think, you know, obviously if we can be of any help to you, we'd be happy to do that, because this is turned into a passion project of ours. And obviously that's why Jason and I speak about it. But something that we really think would be beneficial and go a long way with your schools as well.
Yeah, one thing I'll add is that if you remember the original problem statement, it was the EMPS and retention. Part of the output of this was increased EMPS, so that's a very positive thing for the school, as well as the retention increase. So while there were a number of things that were put in place, the core thing that we were focusing on was boosting that teacher morale. By measuring those two items, we were able to see the direct impact on what this actually had. So keep in mind, all of that has the ROI of, we all know the cost and pain of turnover. This was obviously to be able to see those positive impacts went a long way. So one of the other things that I'll just mention is that the school has now decided to do this periodically every few years, because I think one of the things happens is we get so caught, you know, in our routines, and we add new things that some of the old behaviors come back into play. So revisiting this on a regular basis or a routine basis would be a great thing. So that concludes the presentation. Are there any questions, comments, anything?
Jason and Lindsay, I want to thank you both for being with us today. I have a question, and there may be others that do as well. I know we've got some school leaders and some HR folks on the call with us, and I'm going to take a guess. And I don't want to speak for every school, but I'm going to guess that the time and motion study is a new process or would be a new process for most schools in PA. It's probably kind of a standard practice in the HR profession and maybe in the private sector, but I think it'd be a new, it sounds like a very effective strategy that our schools might undertake. My question would be, as a school leader that, is kind of operating on a lean timeline and finite resources, how do you execute? Maybe this is a two-part question, but what would be your recommendations on how to execute this if you were going to do it internally? That is kind of on your own with your own team. And second, how do you select the folks that you do the study with? And Lindsay, you spoke to having kind of a cross section, but what would be kind of the recommended amount of folks and type of folks that you'd want to follow?
Yeah, I think what's really important is that this is attainable at a smaller scale. And I think preparing is going to be really important in planning your day around the time and motion study as an administrator or whomever you select to be the observer as part of the time and motion study. It's really important that your day is free to do the time and motion study. Like I mentioned, we smack Jason on the wrist for trying to slack and do it at the same time. But I think that will be probably one of the biggest challenges, is that the observer has to be focused on the teacher and in the classroom. And so making sure that you're planning ahead of that and considering it like a do not contact day or something of that nature. And I know that's really hard to say, especially if you're an administrator at a school. But maybe you could segment your day, right? Maybe you do morning observations and time and motion studies, and then free up the afternoon to get, your regular things done, or vice versa. Maybe trying to chunk that out in bits and pieces. And we tried to just knock out the 8-hour day with the teacher because we were able to, but that's not to say that you couldn't break it into segments of the day to track that time in motion. And maybe that'll be a more bite-sized piece, right? Maybe you're tracking just the morning shift for teachers and starting out with a group of maybe 5 teachers. Maybe you do it Monday through Friday, right? And do the first 2 hours of every teacher's day and select a different teacher for each day. I think there are bite-sized ways to approach it and be able to track that data and doing it consistently. So maybe making sure you're tracking the same hours of every day for that teacher. I think that's going to be really important. But then also there are things that you can do to just kind of get you to a better place without having to dedicate that 8-hour day to do a time and motion study. Those interview questions that Jason shared, like just sitting down with their teachers and getting that feedback on those 3 key concerns of what do you think you're spending a lot of time on that you shouldn't be. And I think there's value in having those conversations with your teachers as it is. So maybe it isn't the time and motion study. Maybe it's just taking 10 minutes out of your day to talk to each teacher and asking them that same question. You can still get that feedback, or even creating a survey, a Survey Monkey or a Google form. There are some things that you can do there too, just to aggregate that information and get that survey and data back. And that could be a starting point just to understand if you need to do a time and motion study. I think there are some bite-sized pieces that you can do to get you to that place. And, slow and steady wins the race at the end of the day too. There's no reason that you have to jump, head in and do it all at once. There's, I think, respect in wanting to approach it in a methodical and concerted way, to where it's not just a hot one day and cold the next day. And to be clear, the time and motion study was new for us too. So this was the first one that we did. And I think there's, areas for improvement and opportunity where we can make it more manageable and sustainable to continue to do it down the road. I think we just came out the gate really, really hot and heavy, and just, rolled out this project as one big bite-sized piece. But I think over time, as we want to continue to do that and build out the program, we're going to have to probably reduce the amount of effort and resources that we use in this one time. But I think it's definitely attainable. And like I said, just kind of progress as you go in different ways.
Great. Thanks, Lindsay. We have a few minutes if there's anybody else on the call who has a question. I also would open the floor if there's any schools that have tried anything similar to what Lindsay and Jason have described, or have kind of a similar strategy that's worked and you want to take an opportunity to share. Is there anybody who has a question or a success story?
I'll jump in. I'll say that we utilize stay interviews at Penn Hills Charter School of Entrepreneurship as a retention strategy. We do a lot of informal check-ins. We do town hall meetings with our staff, and we also have a mentorship program. So I think also just as a practice, as an organization and school culture, admin is very much involved with our teachers and spend a lot of time in the classrooms just as a practice. And so it's not unusual for our teachers to interact with the CEO, to have him pop into a classroom, to have other directors and high-level folks just in the hallways and in the classroom and interacting with students. And I think that creates a comfort level where teachers feel that they can provide honest feedback and feel that we would respond because they have seen us respond. So it was really interesting to hear about the time and motion study. And I just wanted to ask, do you feel like that tool is maybe a best tool for sort of a crisis situation where maybe admin and teachers are out of sync and there isn't that level of communication and comfort and interaction between administrators and teachers?
I think that's a great question, and I think it definitely could be used in that situation, but with caution, because if you're in this crisis mode and you're concerned that teachers are upset, going in and doing a time and motion study without explaining the why may put them on the defensive, right? Especially if there's a lack of trust already. So I think approaching it in a very methodical and clearly communicated way will be really important if that is a situation. But I don't know that we were at the point of criticalness when we rolled out the program, and I think it was a heightened awareness that it could get there. So I think timing wise, we approached it at the right time before that happened. But I think if you do approach it in that manner, and if it is at a critical state, just being very thoughtful about the approach and the communication is going to be really important. But it could definitely be utilized in that scenario too, if needed.
Well, and I think the other piece to that is, and it's awesome to hear that there's transparency and trust, and the leadership team is visible. I mean, that's lovely to hear. That's one of the best things. However, the other piece to think through is a lot of this can just become routine, right? It's just so practiced that it's not even on the radar of a teacher that this is a pain point. So that was one of the things that we kind of observed, was like they didn't even recognize that they were losing time in some of these categories. So they didn't even know to voice a concern or hey, here's an idea or solution. So that's another benefit of the observation is it can capture things that are being done that we've just gotten so comfortable doing, and it becomes just part of our routine that we don't even recognize that it's either a time suck or distracting or pulling away from the academics component. So that's another way to look at it as well.
Great. Well, Valerie, thanks for sharing what's going on at Penn Hills with us. And Lindsay and Jason, thank you guys again for joining us today and sharing your expertise. Really helpful to hear. And the words that kept coming to mind as I listened to you was, that visibility piece that Jason was talking about, but also just the work of empathy, of understanding what our teachers and educators are doing each and every day goes a long way as a leader in building that culture. So thank you again. Look forward to seeing a lot of you in a few weeks at the conference in Lancaster. So hope you'll come up and say hello, and look forward to catching up. Cheryl, I'll turn it back to you if you want to close us out today.
Sure. Thanks so much, Jesse. Thank you, Jason and Lindsay, for that very informative presentation. There was so much to think about. And thank you, Valerie, for sharing your experience over at Penn Hills. One of the things that we love about this grant and the opportunities created by it is that it gives us a chance to share best practices. And as mentioned, this will be recorded, well, it has been recorded, and it will be uploaded to the YouTube playlist. And we will send an email with the link to that playlist once it is readily available. And we'll also mention it in our newsletter. As Jesse said, we have the conference coming up October 8th, 9th, and 10th. And that link will be included with the email as well. Thank you so much. It's Friday. We hope you're going to have a fantastic weekend and have a wonderful rest of the day. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.